Okay, so quick question. Why do you think Stoicism is the only philosophy we ever hear about? In order to answer that, we have to dive deeper into the modern state of Stoicism. In the modern world, the teachings of Stoicism are both dramatically over and undervalued. But what do I mean by that? Well, I think it's pretty easily explained if we observe how different types of people respond to negative changes in their lives. This group of people are the ones who undervalue Stoicism. Maybe they are aware of its existence, or maybe they simply haven't heard of it before. Ultimately, they aren't applying the principles which could dramatically improve both their happiness and general life quality. So what are they doing instead of Stoicism then? Firstly, this group usually are outward looking, or have what is known as a negative locus of control. Essentially, they focus on the things which they cannot control. Think about that one kid who you played with, who would always blame someone else when they lost, instead of asking themselves what they could have done better. The Draco Malfoy wannabe probably isn't going to go home afterwards and wonder, should I have acted like that? And I bet they didn't take criticism too well either. Of course, this was a super immature version. However, the concept of a child highlights some of the negative aspects of a person who isn't applying any Stoic practices to their lives. But the key point is we must sympathise with this group. Yes, we must. One of the most frustrating things we can experience as human beings is seeing a problem and feeling completely powerless to do anything about it. These people see the finish line. These people see the finish line, run after it, and then hit a wall, not realising it's in fact a door, and they are the only ones with the key. Surely this group would benefit from learning that they should focus on what they can control and ignore what they can't, right? Well, yes. That's exactly what happened to the other group. Those who are unaware of Stoicism or Stoic practices are also very likely to fall into the issue of being the victim and essentially complaining about the state of where they are. Not even blaming other people, but just blaming the world in general, which no one can do anything about and can lead to a very nihilistic sense of the world, which is incredibly depressing, but it's becoming far more common, which I find particularly concerning. This perspective of being the victim is also very dangerous because it can also reflect out onto other people. It's people who feel they have been wronged in some way, so they take that frustration out on other people. Of course, this has been common and has always existed in humanity to some extent, but I believe it's become far more common and certainly has begun to affect far more people. Every single negative emotion or opinion or outburst which somebody has on some form of social media perhaps is far, far, far more likely to gain traction than a positive post. And as a result, that negative post will begin to affect a lot more people than it would have in, say, the 1800s. And therefore, it is affecting a lot more people than it used to. This issue is essentially the greater effect of victim mentality is really piggybacking off a large amount of political polarization on both ends in the Western world. And this polarization essentially means that Stoicism would have a far greater effect on those of today than it would have on those from 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Because there is a lesser percentage of people who are affected by this victim mentality on both sides of the political spectrum. But this ties nicely into our second group, Now, this group of people are those who have grown to overvalue the philosophy. They, like the vast majority of people, began in the first group and moved beyond being the child, as most of us did at some point in our lives. However, what began as an overwhelmingly net positive actually begins to have diminishing marginal returns, even to the point that their application of Stoicism begins to be a net negative in their lives. But how could this happen? Often when we as humans begin to hyper-focus on something, we tend to ignore the basics of the activity and only concentrate on the tiny new changes we can make, and maybe one or two of the basics, which we keep in the back of our heads. This is seen all the time in professional levels of basically anything, but let's take sport as a good, easy example. Often, a coach will try to implement a new tactic to the players, which just doesn't end up working out in the match. Players end up missing passes, and overall it look like Bambi on ice. At half-time, the coach says something along the lines of, "Let's get back to basics." It's only because of the hyper-focus of the tactics that the basics of the game were ignored by the players. And this same concept applies to Stoicism. Yes, Stoicism can be about becoming unshakable. However, only in reference to the emotions felt by the Stoic, and not of the Stoic themselves. The key point of Stoicism is that it is not actually you which becomes unshakable. Yes, you are not becoming unshakable. The entire point of Stoicism is not to become unshakable. Yes, Stoicism can be about becoming unshakable, unbreakable, or whatever. But that's more of a side aspect, a side benefit. Stoicism is really about becoming an observer of your emotions and not allowing them to control you in any way, but also making sure that you're controlling what you can control. That is the key aspect of Stoicism. And you might say, but isn't that basically the same thing? But it's not. In fact, it's very far from it. The part where so many people are going wrong with Stoicism right now, this second group in particular, they are interpreting Stoicism as an excuse to essentially become inflexible in their views, which is never what Stoicism was about. And in fact, it's the opposite. It's about accepting what you can control, changing what you think you can and cannot control, realizing maybe this person has a point. This is an aspect which I can control. They are suggesting an idea which might be useful. However, yes, Stoicism can be about becoming unshakable. However, that's not the reality of Stoicism at all, but just the reality which many people want to accept, because it neglects a very key aspect which makes the philosophy whole. In order to truly experience what Stoicism is, that Stoicism is about detaching yourself from your first initial emotional reaction, observing it, thinking about it, questioning it, accepting it, not denying it in any way. At that point, once you have accepted it, you are able to move past it to the most pivotal part of Stoicism, which is, what can I control? This is the aspect which many people are missing out, even though they think they are controlling it, but they are not. Because they are missing the fact that one of the things they can control is their opinions, which they also want to become unshakable. Closing yourself off from the opinions of others, which so many people seem to interpret as being modern Stoicism, is in reality one of the most harmful things they could do. That is a lot of irony in itself, that people believe that an outside source is telling them to not trust all other outside sources of information. This essentially happens because people do not understand. This is essentially happening because people aren't understanding the difference between being unshakable with your emotions and unshakable as a person. Becoming unshakable with your emotions is something desirable, whereas becoming unshakable as a person is anything but. An unshakable person should not be called unshakable, but should be called stubborn. Whereas somebody who is unshakable with their emotions is known as stoic. One example of somebody becoming too unshakable or unshakable as a person is shown by the Netflix series Better Call Saul, in which Jimmy's brother Chuck is unwilling to alter his negative perception of his brother, despite years of evidence of improvement, which negatively impacts their relationship. When flexibility in his views would have allowed Chuck to re-evaluate if Jimmy deserved such negative treatment. Having a closed mind may also lead to social and emotional isolation, as you begin to ignore your very real emotions, which reflect how your life is going, like it or not. So to answer the original question I gave you, right at the beginning, Stoicism is so popular because the first group have so much they can gain from it. However, it is one of, if not the only philosophy which actively leads to the dismissal of personal reflection, despite the idea of focusing on what you can control being such an important aspect of it. So the question is, why does this duality exist? And more importantly, why is it growing? Well, firstly, modern Stoicism seems to be incredibly polarizing. Those who are in between Group 1 and Group 2 are naturally suggested more content, which pulls them further into the vast array of Stoicism content online, which appears to actively focus on the unshakable and strength aspects, and less on the self-reflection. This isn't too surprising, as self-reflection isn't exactly the most sexy thing you can sell to somebody. Perhaps this is why the rise of Stoicism in very recent times has coincided with the rise of the manosphere, which greatly idolizes the perfect traditional man, and may also explain the neglection and self-reflection aspect, which does not define an ideal traditional man, whereas strength and unshakability does. The rise in Stoicism could also be impacted by the increase of cancel culture, people taking offence more easily than in the previous years, something which directly contradicts the preaching of Stoicism. Perhaps the marketability of Stoicism also plays a very strong part in both the formation and the growth of the second group, as it doesn't take you very long to find 3 accounts which will preach about how they can explain Stoicism so it will change your life, as long as you pay the £15 fee, of course. As Teddy Roosevelt said, pointing out problems without offering a solution is just whining, and I really agree with that. So to avoid this being a whine, I think in order to correctly apply Stoicism in the modern day, one must apply a more Socratic perspective, in which they accept the fragility of their views and knowledge. While doing so, you should aim to focus on the application of the basic principles of Stoicism, as those are the aspects which hold the greatest value. In doing so, we will be able to benefit the most out of the goldmine that Stoicism is. but also sidestepping the weakness of modern Stoicism, which fails to remember the all-important self-reflection. If I showed you a brand new perspective and you want to see more of this content, liking or subbing down below recommends this video to more people like yourself, which will allow me to produce better quality videos, or more videos like these for you to watch in the future. That said, thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye.